Well, there's something that we today always seem to be chasing, but we never seem to reach. We always feel like it's just beyond our grasp. And I'm talking about contentment. Contentment. It's that sense of satisfaction, that sense that you have all that you need and you want nothing more. Now, let's be plain about this. Desire itself drives much of what we do, and it isn't all that bad. If we didn't desire food or water or rest or shelter at all, we'd starve, die of thirst, collapse from exhaustion, or succumb to the elements. If we didn't desire some form of recreation or social interaction, we might become depressed, overwhelmed, or lonely. And if no one had the, let's call it the reproductive impulse, then humanity would probably go extinct. To some extent, desire is normal and natural. But as with so many things, evil can take hold of our natural impulses and push them to the extreme. What's more, because we live in a consumerist society, we're bombarded by messages that tell us that we need more, that we deserve more. Corporations and their advertising agencies aggressively appeal to our desires, literally as if their survival depended on it. Those are some of the reasons why we never seem to feel content or satisfied these days. But the futile human search for contentment, for satisfaction, isn't a new one. The classic musical Fiddler on the Roof takes place in 1905. It was first performed in 1964, and it became an Academy Award-winning film in 1971. And one of the film's most famous songs is about the lead character Tevye's desperate longing for contentment. Now, at first I was planning on showing you a clip from the movie Fiddler on the Roof, but then I thought, you know what? I'm a theater geek, so let's give this a try. Dear God, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, that there's no shame in being poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man, diddle-deedle-diddle-diddle-diddle-deedle-diddle-dum, lay long I'm biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Diddle-deedle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-dum. If I were a biddy-biddy rich, yiddle-deedle-diddle-diddle man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozens right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof with real wooden floors below. There would be one long staircase just going up and another even longer coming down. And one more leading nowhere just for show. I'd fill my yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear, squawking just as noisily as they can, with each loud papa-kee, papa-kak, papa-kee, papa-kak, would land like a trumpet on their ears, as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. If I were a rich man, diddle-deedle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-dum, all day long I'd biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Diddle-deedle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-bum. If I were a bitty-bitty rich diddle-deedle-diddle-diddle man, I'd see my wife, my Goldie, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight. I see her putting on airs and strutting like a peacock. My, what a happy mood she's in. Screaming at the servants day and night. The most important men in town will come to fawn on me. They will ask me to advise them like a Solomon the wise. If you please, Rev Tevye, pardon me, Rev Tevye, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you really know. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. And I discuss the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. If I were a rich man, diddle 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 dum. All day long I'd biddy biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Diddle 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 dum. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Oh my gosh. I didn't expect a standing ovation. After the cat song in December, I thought you'd get a kick out of that. Well, now it's time to get back to okay. How do you transition from that, right? I have to wonder how many of us can relate to Tevye's longing. I'm willing to bet that every one of us, including me, could relate to something he says in that song. And we live in one of the richest nations in the world. Even the poorest in this country are still in the top 10% globally. At least compared to Tevye, we could all consider ourselves rich, and yet we're still not content. Material wealth, as we've discovered, is not the secret to contentment. But here's the thing, I do believe there was one man among many, who had great advice on how to be content. He was a great Christian missionary. Some would say the greatest. Many would say the greatest. He was a great church planter. He traveled miles upon miles, planting new churches in every community he visited. He would appoint local leaders to take charge in his absence, but he'd always stay in contact with the churches he planted by letter. And in those letters, he'd give them spiritual guidance and direction. 13 of those letters are preserved for us in the New Testament. And of course, I'm talking about Paul of Tarsus, also known as Paul the Apostle. Now, just so you know, the word apostle means emissary. It was a term for a diplomat who was sent to represent a king in a foreign land. In the Bible, the word apostle refers to those who were directly commissioned by Jesus to take his message to the world. Many of you probably already know, though, that message was not well received in every community the apostles visited, and it often got them in trouble with the local authorities. Jewish religious leaders often believed that the message of Jesus was a false teaching that needed to be snuffed out. The Romans took issue with anybody who was disruptive to the social order, and the apostles' teachings, unfortunately, often had that unintended result. Now, Paul himself was beaten and imprisoned more than once, and one of his last recorded imprisonments was a house arrest in the city of Rome. During this time in chains and under the watchful eye of a Roman guard, he wrote a letter to the church in the city of Philippi that had a lot to say about how he found a way to be content no matter what his circumstances were. Whether he faced life or faced death, whether he was free or in chains. So, over the next few weeks, I'd like us to walk together chapter by chapter through this letter, and I would like us to see what insights Paul has for us about embracing holy, God-given contentment. In this first chapter of his letter, Paul starts with a warm greeting for the Christians in Philippi. He praises them for spreading the message of Jesus in their community, and he expresses his confidence that God will continue to shape their character until their lives fully reflect the character of Jesus. That was what we were singing in that song earlier about God doing a work in us. Those words were taken directly from this letter of Paul. And then after that, he expresses his ultimate hope for them. This is what he writes. He says, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." Paul wanted nothing more than to see the Philippian Christians become more and more loving, and that love would be guided by an ever-deepening, God-given wisdom. You see, only by increasing in love and in godly wisdom would they ever attain the full righteousness, the full blameless character of Jesus. And that kind of growth, by the way, is unattainable through human efforts. So don't think this is a message about trying to be a better person. This is something much more spiritual than that. Because to attain the blameless character that Paul is writing about, it has to be the work of God within a person through his or her commitment to Jesus. And that was what Paul wanted more than anything else. His concern wasn't for his own ugly circumstances, but for the spiritual well-being of the Philippian Christians. Reading between the lines, we can see that the Philippian Christians were worried about Paul upon hearing he was under house arrest. And we can see the evidence of that because he immediately tries to reassure them. He writes, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear." By going to prison for what he stood for, Paul was demonstrating his commitment to and belief in Christ. His commitment and his sincere faith was getting attention. His own guards were intrigued by it, and the Roman Christians had become braver because of his example. Paul was telling them that his imprisonment was advancing the kingdom of God, and that was what really mattered to him anyway. And he didn't care who was preaching the message of Christ as long as it got out there. He wrote that he would celebrate the message being preached even by those doing it out of envy and rivalry and out of selfish ambition. He was just joyful the message was getting out. Interesting, isn't it, that he would be talking about joy while wearing chains under house arrest and under the supervision of a Roman guard. And that's not all he has to say about joy in this chapter. He says, "Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance." I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Apparently, what we're seeing here is a Paul who is facing the possibility of execution. He doesn't know if he'll have to face his own death or if God will keep him around. Either way, he says he knows it'll be okay. If he dies, not only will he demonstrate the truth and sincerity of his message, but he will find rest in the presence of Christ. On the other hand, if he lives, he can continue doing God's work, ministering to the churches he started, something he believes that they still need from him. So what we're seeing here in action is Paul's total submission to God's will and the peace and contentment he gets from it. Remember the prayer we said in worship a few weeks ago? I think it was the first Sunday of the year. We prayed a prayer called the Wesley Covenant Prayer. It's a historical prayer from our tradition, about 250 years old. And in case you've forgotten that prayer, here's the main thrust of it right here. I am no longer my own, but thine. Put me to what thou wilt, rank me with whom thou wilt. Put me to doing, put me to suffering. Let me be employed by thee or laid aside for thee, exalted for thee or brought low for thee. Let me be full, let me be empty. Let me have all things, let me have nothing. I freely and heartily yield all things to thy pleasure and disposal. Now, of course, it goes without saying that none of us want bad things to happen to us. And that's not what this prayer is saying. We're not praying that God would allow bad things to happen to us. No, this prayer is saying that we are willing to face and to be faithful through whatever God sees fit to allow us to experience. This prayer is saying that we trust God to bring about eternal and ultimate good in spite of our suffering, and sometimes even through it. That's the kind of submission to God's will that we see in Paul, the kind of submission that helps him have that peace, have that contentment. He sees how God can bring ultimate good out of his situation. He already sees in his imprisonment helping the kingdom. And if he dies, he gets to show the world that his message isn't just something he made up, it's something he believes in enough to die for. And what's more, if he dies, he gets to be with Jesus. On the other hand, he still has important work to do in this life. So whatever happens, whatever ugliness Paul has to deal with in the middle of the story, he knows there will be a happy ending one way or another. That God's will be done either in spite of it or through it. Because of his faith, Paul isn't afraid of what's coming next. He's not afraid of his imprisonment and stifling his ministry. He's not even afraid of death, at least not enough to give up hope. He's probably not looking forward to it, but he's not afraid of it. At least he's not letting fear compromise his faithfulness to God. He has no idea what's going to happen. But that's okay, because God will salvage even the ugliest of situations, and all Paul has to do is continue to be faithful, to continue to live as Jesus commanded, and to carry out the mission God gave him as best he can. Or as Paul puts it to the Philippians, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come to see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they'll be destroyed, but you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had and now hear that I still have. The Christian is not exempt from struggle or suffering, but we have a reason to be content whatever the circumstances. God's aims for humanity, indeed for all of creation, that is what matters most. And as long as we continue to be faithful, whatever the circumstances, to conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, no matter what happens, God will bring good even out of our darkest seasons. We have an unfailing hope because we know with confidence that we are the beneficiaries of God's plan for the world. That is an unfailing hope that we can hold on to no matter what our circumstances might be. And it's that unfailing hope that is just one component of holy contentment. We'll have more to say about holy contentment in the weeks to come, but one of the most foundational components of it is an unfailing hope and confidence in the will of God.